Got September, Spatial K, Epsu, Umo, Philip GR, Kathleen. Behind Kathleen is J-Trig, Overon, Shiny Joe, JF, Eternal Seeker, Minnesunda, Caver, and Cave Woman. Behind the H players list, we've got Paige, then Squavi 2, Layup, Vidarashi, Renea, Thoakenem, Potru, Busters, Exena, J-Trig. Behind Exena is Zizzy, Umo, and behind Busters is Lutra, Caver, and Cave Woman in the corner. And we've got Rabbit and Jim 1138. Tonight's story is brought to you in part by MissLore.com for some of the history, DPWR.net for the Denis dates, UruArchives.com for the surface history corresponding to the Denis dates, and the Cavernian Calendar Converter, which was written by Brett Middleton of the Fuzzy Physics Institute for converting between Denis and surface time. Tonight's story is from Myst, the Book of Atris. As I've told these stories, we've learned about life in the cavern. We learned how the Denis came from their proud roots, seeking to shed their pride, yet pride crept back into their lives. We watched it cause the downfall of their great empire. We watched as a mother and her young son made their way to the surface from the ruins of Denis. A mother, Anna, grieving for the loss of her soulmate, and her son, Gen, angry at his mother for, he believed, leaving his father behind. We learned about Gen's adolescent life and his all-consuming anger towards his mother for what he perceived as her part in the fall of Denis and in his father's death. Basically, she was the root cause of his world having fallen apart. Instead of learning patience, he was impatient, choosing easy paths even though they may not be the correct ones. Where his paths would become blocked, he chose to use brute force to overcome his obstacles rather than use reason and logic. We learned of his son, Atris, and of Anna's second attempt to raise a good and decent child, teaching him to be observant of his surroundings, even of the bad things that occur as a result of his experiments. We learned how, when Atris was 14 years old, his father returned to the cleft to take him to Denis, where Gen intended to use Atris as an assistant, together writing ages to rebuild what Gen had perceived as the glory of Denis. We learned of Atris' first trek to Denis and the beginnings of his lessons from Gen on how ages are created. We saw the first of many confrontations between father and son, how Gen took Atris to show him some of his ages and ending up at Gen's 37th age. We saw Atris' learning of the art and of the relationship between the words written in an age's descriptive book and the end result, and of his first book, which he named Inception, in which he applied the rules of writing that he had learned, writing it from scratch, not copying phrases found in other descriptive books, like his father was doing. We saw the beginnings of the son's abilities begin to outpace the father's. We saw how Gen's lack of understanding of the art led to his making his 37th age unstable, his desecration of Atris' age of inception, and his burning the book of his 37th age because of his inability and lack of desire due to his impatience to fix it. We watched as Atris realized the depth of his father's madness and tried to escape, only to be caught in the tunnels on his way to the surface and locked in a large room in the mansion on Kavir. The only items therein being a pen, a bottle of writer's ink, and the descriptive book to Gen's 5th age that we know as Riven. Last week, we saw Atris cause a small cave-in around the only door out of that room, effectively imprisoning him permanently. Then, studying that descriptive book, ensuring it was not some sort of trap, he decided to link there anyway. He found a temple hut, similar to the one on his father's 37th age, a cave that held his father's Korvach, and a second cave with immense volcanic heat. This second cave was curious in that there was another pool of water on the ceiling. He climbed the ladder next to the hole in the ceiling and entered the pool. Nearing the surface, he saw the shadow of someone standing near the pool's edge. In trying to slow his ascent, he ended up swallowing some of the water, which was like hot tar in his throat. Losing consciousness, he floated to the surface of the circular pool he found when he had first arrived. Tonight's story opens in the Denis year of 9429, approximately 1773 A.D., the year of the Boston Tea Party, which occurred on October 10th of that year, a truly busy year in Atris's life. Two men were there at the pool when a body floated to the surface of the pool. Aside from being waterlogged, the stranger's skin was pale and corpse-like. Rea, the old man, advocated throwing the body back into the water. Carol would not hear of it, and persisted to try and pump the water out of the dead body's lungs, as well as administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It took a little while, but soon the last of the water was out, and the youth was breathing on his own once more. They wrapped the stranger in a blanket and carried him back to the hut. As Carol and his younger brother Erlar administered to the feverishly sleeping stranger, a female voice called out from the shadows. "How long?" she asked impatiently, in clear Denis with little accent. "Not long now, Katrin," Carol replied to his cousin. "Let him sleep a little while longer." She asked if he was damaged, who he was, and if they thought he belonged to Gen. After learning that he had a pair of eyeglasses like Gen, she asked if he had been marked, as she herself had been, with a box-like symbol printed at the neck. Carol shook his head in reply. It wasn't long until the stranger awoke. The first words spoken by him were, "Where am I?" Carol informed him in thickly accented Denis that he was in the hut on Riven. The brothers offered him some soup to drink. The stranger accepted the bowl, as well as a second and a third. Then, getting sleepy again, drifted off to sleep. All the while, Katrin sat in silence, observing. The hut was a typical Rivenese house, constructed of mud and daub, giving them a plaster-like finish. The homes on Riven were staked into the side of a large crater on the island, facing the center of the crater, with its pool of algae-filled water some 50 feet below. When he finally awoke again, the brothers were gone. So he lazily looked around at his surroundings, until he noticed a startling pair of green eyes that were looking back. "You almost died. What were you doing in the pool?" she scolded. "I don't know," was his lame reply. They nervously studied one another, but not together, their eyes performing a seemingly choreographed dance where one would avert their eyes while the other studied them, then switched positions. She asked him his name, to which he replied, "Atris." He asked her hers, to which she replied, "Katrin." After Atreus repeated her name as Catherine, she corrected him and repeated it as Katrin. Unfortunately, her name had already been cast in his mind. She would be forever known to him as Catherine. Their meeting ended when she informed him that she had had a dream about him, then turned and abruptly left. Atreus watched her leave, then drifted off to sleep once more. When Atreus recovered from his distress, he decided to experiment with the water a bit. He took a bowl of it and dipped his hand inside to remove a drop of water. He clenched his fist tightly for a count of 60, then slowly uncurled his fingers. The drop slowly floated upwards, its surface shiny and reflective like a drop of blue-colored mercury. He didn't notice that Katrin had come up behind him. He was slightly startled when she called out his name. He replied, "Yes, Catherine?" Her face showed a brief annoyance at his mispronunciation of her name, but she had given up trying to correct him. She asked what he was doing. "Water shouldn't do that when it gets warm," he replied. "What should water do?" she asked. "Well, it shouldn't float when it gets warm, and it shouldn't give me a stomach ache." She laughed at that. It was the first time since he had met her that she had laughed, and the change it made to her face was quite remarkable. What he did not realize was that the water was full of algae that bonded the water to it and reacted to heat, making the water itself to appear to move. He noticed that the Rivanese used a powder to neutralize the algae, and special cooking pots to trap the algae as it rose, and allowed the algae-free water to be poured out underneath. He noticed that she had seemed to be looking far away, distracted. He asked her what she was thinking. She said that she had noticed his pale eyes and odd-looking goggles, and wondered what he had to do with Gen. "I am Atreus, his son," he replied. A look of triumph crossed her face, then asked him what it was that he wanted. "What do I want?" he asked. He told her that what he really wanted was to go back home to the cleft in the desert. Though it wasn't much, he had thought of it as paradise. He told her a little about Anna, his grandmother, and how his father had come for him when he was 14. Catherine fixed him with an intense stare. Atreus began looking about him, at the temple to the south and the copse of trees where he first linked in, and to his right at the great tree which was clearly visible anywhere on the island. Her tone became steady as she said, "I had a dream of you." "A dream?" "Yes. I dreamed of a dead man floating in the pool, and now you're here." Atreus watched as she walked away from him, her green dress flowing about her, and her feet seeming to float on the grass. Later, Katrin was writing in her copybook when Gen came in and sat down in front of her. After asking if she had seen anything unusual happening, which she said no, he continued with her lessons. He had created a guild of writers on Riven, and Katrin was his best student. None of the other guild members, though they were good at copying, had begun to grasp the true meaning of the symbols. In contrast, Katrin had grasped it almost immediately. In fact, she was almost fluent in the Garo-Hevti, the great words that were used to construct ages. Almost, because Gen had kept certain key words from her, making it impossible for her to construct a complete age on her own. Gen came up with his plan long before he had imprisoned Atreus. Though his son had a talent that should not be squandered, it was impossible for Gen to work with him. He had decided to select someone more docile that he could more easily control, even if that someone was not quite as talented. That someone being Katrin. It was at that time Gen told her his plans. They were to be married at the end of 30 days. The other guild members would be given instructions for the ceremony, and she was to prepare herself. She would sit at his right hand, and together they would rule 1,000 worlds. Late that afternoon, Katrin was standing among the trees at the end of the forest, deep in thought. Atreus had been looking all over the island for her when he finally saw her standing there. He came up behind her. What he saw has been best described already in the Book of Atreus, so I shall use it here. In the mottled shade of the massive branches, her slender figure seemed unreal, a thing of earth and grass, the green of her cloak, the raven black of her hair blending with the surrounding shadows. Atreus could tell that something was troubling her. Her normally bright and inquisitive eyes were dark and brooding. He softly called her name. "Catherine, are you all right?" She nodded. Then he offered to walk her back to the village. They walked side by side out of the forest and through the meadow. Please join us next week as we see Atreus learn of yet another false belief of his father's and devise a plan to deal with them once and for all. The end. Thank you all for coming tonight, and to those of you watching from home. And time to end the story right now.